Welcome to our student presentation for Geography and World Events. We are Katie, Jacob, Olivia, and Marshall, and we'll start with Olivia.
The three major native groups of Latin America are, first, Native American. Native Americans arrived during the Lithic stage, which is the earliest period of human occupation in the Americas, as post-glacial hunters and collectors spread through Americas. In post-Columbian times, they experienced tremendous population decrease, particularly in the early decade of the colonization. They have since recovered in numbers, exceeding around 60 million. With the growth of other groups, they now make a majority only in Bolivia. In Guatemala, Native Americans comprise 2/5 of the population. In many countries, people of mixed Native American and European ancestry make up most of the population. Secondly, Asians. People of Asian descent number several million in Latin America. The first Asians to settle in the region were Filipino, due to Spain trading in Asia and the Americas. The majority of Asian Latin Americans are of Japanese or Chinese ancestry and inhabit mainly in Brazil and Peru. Brazil is home to about 2 million people of Asian descent. This includes the largest ethnic Japanese community outside of Japan itself. Peru has one of the largest Chinese communities in the world, with approximately 1 million Peruvians being of Chinese ancestry. There is a strong ethnic Japanese presence in Peru, where a past president and several politicians are of Japanese descent. And lastly, Africans. Millions of African slaves were brought to Latin America from the 16th century onward, the majority of whom were sent to the Caribbean region and Brazil. The reason African Americans were used as slaves rather than Native Americans is because the Native Americans lack of immunity to diseases, which meant they died off in greater numbers. The African slave market was more convenient and cost-effective compared to warring with tribes and trying to enslave people that would either die quickly in bondage or could escape more readily. This is why there are so many African Americans in Latin America now. Today, the Africans are most abundant in Brazil, with more than 10 million, and in Haiti, with more than 7 million.
So next, as West colonized Latin America, and they brought with them a lot of ideas and different forms of disease and other things. So some of the main things that they brought, though, are governments, religion, and different arts and traditions. So with governments, they brought more formal government systems, especially with democracy, so that they had more regulated forms of government that were in charge of larger areas. They also brought with them religion. So about 80 to 90% of most of Latin America is Christian, which is pretty huge considering the fact that Christianity came from the West and was not innately from Latin America. Approximately 69% of Latin America is Roman Catholic, so the majority, and then that's down a bit from the 90% that it has previously been. The West also brought some new art and traditions and ideas with them. So the ideas that the people originally had inside of Latin America kind of combined with everything that they brought with them from the West, and those mixed together to create this hybrid country where they have some really awesome art and traditions and culture.
So what are the major government systems in Latin America? And most of the systems in Latin America are based around a democracy. And they're all called something different. You have like the federal presidential constitutional republic from Brazil, or the unitary state from Peru, and then all these different democracy-based systems. And they're all kind of similar in that most of them have an executive and a legislative and a judicial branch, but they don't all function the same way. Some of them end up working better than others. Some of them really aren't a democracy in actual execution, and some of them are. So you just have these different setups as far as how they work and how well they function as a government. So the next thing is where the term Latin American civilization comes from. And this is just kind of a literal translation in that the region is known as America from early exploration. And then most of the languages spoken there are based off of Latin. So you get this compound word, if you will, of Latin America, just a very literal translation.
All right, so what are some major historical events from Latin America? So the first one we have, Papal Bull Inter Quietera Hietera, I don't know how to say that, and the Treaty of Tordesillas, and that's 1493 to 1494. So according to previous papal bulls of the 15th century, Portugal held claim to any and all undiscovered lands west of a certain longitude. After Columbus's return, both Spain and Portugal laid claim to the new lands, forcing the Pope to sort things out. Pope Alexander VI issued the bull Inter Calera in 1993, declaring that Spain owned all new lands west of a line 100 leagues, about 300 miles from the Cape Verde Islands. Portugal, not pleased with this verdict, pressed the issue, and the two nations ratified the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1493, which established the line of 370 leagues from the islands. This treaty essentially ceded Brazil to the Portuguese while keeping the rest of the New World for Spain, therefore laying the framework for the modern demographics of Latin America. Next, we have independence from Spain and Portugal, 1806 to 1893. So using the Napoleonic invasion of Spain as an excuse, most of Latin America declared independence from Spain in 1810. By 1825, Mexico, Central America, and South America were free, soon to be followed by Brazil. Spanish rule in the Americas ended in 1893 when they lost their final colonies to the United States following the Spanish-American War. With Spain and Portugal out of the picture, the young American republics were free to find their own way, a process that was always difficult and often bloody. Next, we have the War of the Triple Alliance from 1864 to 1870. This was one of the most devastating wars ever fought in South America. The War of the Triple Alliance pitted Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil against Paraguay. When Uruguay was attacked by Brazil and Argentina in late 1864, Paraguay came to its aid and attacked Brazil. Ironically, Uruguay, then under a different president, switched sides and fought against its former ally. By the time the war was over, hundreds of thousands had died, and Paraguay was in ruins. It would take decades for the nation to recover. As we know, with most any country, nation, and the like, we will have many more than 3 major historical events in their history, but those are just some for this. All right, so some major eras of Latin American history. So we have, the ancient Latin America, which is, Mayan, Aztec, Incan cultures and civilizations. And we go into the colonial Latin America, where during that period we get things like how the native population was wiped out, native culture was forbidden, and the Spanish promoted much exploitation of natives and the people in the New World, and then many existing power structures were replaced. So we see that, and then independence happens and is declared, and we reach the modern day that we have today. So when did Latin American civilization begin to take shape? Latin America is generally known to consist of the entire continent of South America, as well as Mexico, Central America, and the islands of the Caribbean, whose inhabitants speak a Romanic language. The peoples of this large area shared the experience of conquest and colonizations by the Spaniards and Portuguese from the late 15th through the 18th century, as well as movements of independence from Spain and Portugal in the early 19th century. No one is quite sure where the ancient Mayan, Incan, and Aztec civilizations came from, however, and that's part of where we get much of the mystery that we have about them. All right, so here are some of our sources, and we have another page as well. Yeah, so that's our presentation. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll get you next time.